button. It says.
I see. It's on.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, God, thank you. I would have forgot.
Oh, wait. There, you can't see me.
I'm being very good. I'm monitoring the waiting room. So that's kind of what I'm trying to focus
And I was here to help you with that. Geshe-la asked me to help you. So if you want me to do it, I'm happy to do it. Whatever you want.
on. Okay, well, if I miss somebody, then there's somebody there now.
I don't see anyone in there because you're leading it, so I can't take it from you.
Oh.
Yeah.
So how do you do it then?
We're both the host, so I don't know. I'll just keep watching it for you because I will.
Okay, so if you see that I missed somebody, just let me know.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, hello to everybody who's there. And this is our third session, and we're going to be talking about how can we lead a meaningful life in the face of constant change and uncertainty. So let's take a minute to just rejoice in being able to come together to learn about ourselves, to learn about the predicament that we're faced with, perhaps to see it from a different perspective. Let's think about what we can do about it. Let's be thankful that we can have this opportunity to meet virtually, not something to be taken for granted, because many people don't have the resources, the ability to do this. So we're very fortunate. So I think that although we've been sacrificing our in-person camaraderie and companionship, on the positive side, we're reducing our carbon imprint. And that's certainly something that's very important, as we've learned. And finally, the other big advantage of meeting virtually, meeting over Zoom, is that we don't have to get dressed. We don't have to look good, right? How many of
Something happened.
Oh, I hit the wrong button. Hold on. Ani Tendrol, if you can hear me, you have to unmute.
How's that? I clicked the unmute
Yep.
button.
Yep.
All right. So we're going to start with a prayer called the Four Immeasurables. This is a prayer that is very, very, very important in the Buddhist tradition. I know many of you have memorized it already. And this is really the basis of generating the mind of enlightenment, the mind that cherishes others as much as, and ideally even more than we cherish ourselves. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from desire and hatred. So that's really the motivation for any Dharma study, any Dharma practice. It's really wishing that all sentient beings will be free from any form of suffering, that we can generate within ourselves the mind of infinite love, infinite compassion, infinite joy, and infinite equanimity. So in the last two sessions, we examined the first and second truths, the truth of suffering and the causes of suffering. Specifically, we learned how our innate survival instinct is connected to a fictitious I, an ever-changing persona, ever-changing identities. Unable to break free from this perspective of self-importance, or ego grasping, self-cherishing. I thought self-importance was a good translation. We live as though we're drugged, or as though we're in a medically induced coma or some kind of a dream state. But it's impossible to discern what's true from what's false. We assent to the appearance of the ego, believing in it, taking it in for face value. And that's the case with all of the phenomena, the reality that we construct. Most of the time, we're not questioning how things exist, how we exist. We're not asking, like, who's the man behind the curtain, right? Under ordinary conditions. So this dream world seems like it will last forever, and that things are basically static, permanent, and that the ego itself, the sense of self itself, is also, permanent, right? We talked about how the person that we were an hour ago, or this morning, or yesterday, feels like, the same person that we are right now. So it feels like there's some kind of self that's independent of our body and mind. And our self-cherishing or self-important minds, henchmen, are desire and hatred and their minions. And these can fuel violent protests and dissent, thus creating the karma for a fall to the lower realms in our next life. But ordinarily, we have to admit that we're completely duped. So as a result of tightly holding on to me, myself, and I, as we talked about last time, we engage in actions, right? Whether they're protests or whether they're acts of, even acts of love, right? There can be a sense of self-centeredness involved. These actions and results leave imprints on our mental consciousness that ripen in the future. And when our minds are overcome by the force of negative afflictions, such as greed or envy or jealousy, spite, then the seeds of unhappiness are sown. When positive feelings, such as non-attachment, faith, or non-harmfulness, are in control, when they prevail in our minds, then the seeds of happiness are sown. When our minds are overcome. Oh, so I said that right. So anyway, so the point is that we're reborn over and over again in samsara due to the habit energy of emotions, positive and negative, and the karma that are outcomes of this fundamental ignorance, this fundamental delusion. But the good news, the reason why we're all here learning about this, is that we don't have to experience samsara. We can get off the roller coaster or leave the haunted house, get out of the house of mirrors, anytime we decide to do so. We won't make an effort to free ourselves, though, until we are convinced beyond the shadow of a doubt that samsaric misery is 100% unbearable. Like, I'm not going to give up my box of Godiva chocolates unless I really have to. So that's why the teachings on the truth of suffering are so extensive. So if you have time later, or if you've studied this before, it's really, you have to go through the tour of the sufferings of all of the realms many, many times to convince yourself, right? So they're described in terms of the 8 kinds of suffering, the 6 kinds of suffering, the 3 kinds of suffering, and the specific sufferings of each of these 6 realms, gods, demigods, hungry ghosts, hell beings, animals, and humans, are taught in incredible, incredible detail. So the teachings on the suffering of samsara and death and impermanence give rise to both powerful revulsion and fear, so that we run away from the amusement park and never once look back. So we're going to take a closer look at impermanence and death, because those topics are both at a subtle level and at a grosser level, from the basis of this idea of how we can cope with change, right? So these topics, impermanence and depth, are subjects that we often shy away from discussing. These are things that we don't ordinarily want to talk about because they make us uncomfortable. Familiarizing ourselves repeatedly with the inevitability of death is, however, the best way to prepare for its arrival on our doorstep. Acceptance of death enables us to appreciate every moment of our lives because we live our lives to the fullest, knowing that they may depart at any time. And so there's a very famous verse, one of the Buddha's teachings. He says, "The end of collection is dispersion. The end of rising is falling. The end of meeting is parting. The end of birth is death." So we're going to take a look at just the three types of suffering. So I mentioned that suffering can be categorized or explained in different ways, but they all can be condensed or collapsed down into the teaching on the three types of suffering. And you'll notice that they all revolve around, they all come back to this idea of impermanence, of how things are changing from moment to moment. So there are, just as a bit of background, we have three kinds of feelings. Okay, so unpleasant feelings, pleasant feelings, and neutral feelings, right? And these are associated, with the body as well as with the mind. And there's when we're feeling a pleasant feeling, like let's say, we're having a delicious cup of hot tea, then an experience of mental happiness, right? We feel happy when we're engaged in that kind of pleasant feeling. And then the opposite is true, an unpleasant feeling such as a mosquito bite, that itchy feeling causes mental unhappiness, right? So that's just kind of the relationship between feelings and this experience of happiness. It's kind of a different way of looking at it, feelings and the experience of happiness. So that's why I'm bringing it up. It's explained again in detail in the teachings. So what are the three, now that we've talked a little bit about that? The three are the suffering of change, the suffering of suffering, and pervasive suffering. So suffering of change is, so the example that is given that carries through each of these types of sufferings is that of an open wound. So think that you have a painful open wound. So the suffering of change shows us how, if this wound that we're experiencing is bathed in a nice cool water with a soft cloth, then that gives rise to, a relief of that suffering, right? So a pleasant feeling and happiness arises when we put that cool water or maybe some nice ointment on the wound, nice Band-Aid, right? But suffering of change says that after a few minutes, then eventually that cool water may become aggravating for some reason. Maybe it warms up or something, and the wound, instead of feeling pleasant and comfortable, changes to the opposite, which would be the suffering of suffering, the experience of pain. Okay, so suffering of suffering then is the painful open wound, were it to be irritated by like salt water. Okay, so that would give rise to the experience of pain, right? Unpleasant feeling. And so then your mind, of course, feels unhappy. And then finally, pervasive suffering. This is actually, the most difficult to understand and the most, I guess, unique or different, I think, way of thinking about life. So the pervasive suffering then is centered around the neutral feelings, which is really most of the time, right? Most of the time, our minds are pervaded with just kind of neutral thoughts, neither painful nor pleasant, just neutral, right? But imagine that, or think of yourself, we should think of ourselves as being a big, painful, open wound, right? So it's not just like having a little open sore on your toe. Just think that being born as a sentient being, as a human being, right, or any being in the desire realm, right? So anyway, the point is that we are just a big, open wound. That's the state of our existence, right? So think of how, given that situation, then we're extremely vulnerable, and we're subject to impermanence, right? So being a big open wound affects, applies to both our body and to our mind. And there's a beautiful quote from Geshe Sopa Rinpoche, page 245, volume 2. Okay, we're gonna be doing some book flipping here, but I think I've got all my quotes marked already. Where he says, and I just wanted to read this because if I just leave it at that, I think the impact of these words, of this thought, isn't going to sink in. So here's what he says: the suffering of pervasive suffering, also known as the suffering of conditionality. You have an open wound, right? We know that if you put cool water on it, the pain will be reduced, and we call that experience a pleasant feeling. At the other extreme, if you rub salt into the wound, the pain sharply increases, and we call that unpleasant feeling. However, even without either of these two actions, you still have a big open wound. The very nature of that wound, its condition, is suffering. This is a suffering of conditionality, and it pervades all experience within cyclic existence, including neutral feeling, when you do not have a strong reaction one way or another to a stimulus. Another name for the suffering of conditionality is pervasive suffering, because all of cyclic existence is pervaded by this suffering nature. Okay, so then he goes on. So what's also interesting is is the idea that he said, well, I should just read this. The suffering of conditionality encompasses even neutral feelings. And why is that? Because they're inseparably connected to the so-called negative tendencies. So negative tendencies refers, and sometimes it's translated, if you have the Lamrim Chemo, if we're studying this with Geshe Darge. So in that translation, negative tendency is translated as dysfunctional tendencies, which I found quite difficult to understand. But anyway, they refer to the potential you carry with you in the form of karma and afflictions to experience undesirable circumstances, right? So it's the potential, it's kind of like the package deal. It's the potential in the form of karma and afflictions to experience suffering. And the Tibetan term is Ngengen La, Ngengen Le. Ngengen Le. Sorry. It got a little messed up when I copied and pasted it here. It was a little hard to read. Anyway, the point being that we are in a place, it's a place of receiving evil. Okay, so we're in a birth, we've taken birth in a bad place because it's we're in a situation where there's great suffering. And there's not just suffering now, but there's the potential, right? Because we have the karma and the negative afflictions. We have the potential for experiencing suffering in the future. So it's like we're in a seed bed. So for those of you who are gardeners, think of, like the big seed bed. You got all the seeds for that will ripen, both positive and negative, right? Positive and negative, depending on what your motivation was in doing an act. And when the right conditions come about, right, when you have enough fertilizer and sun and rain, etc., then those seeds will come to fruition. Okay. So then I want to go a little bit further into this idea of the aggregates, right? Because we've been talking about who we are, right? How do we exist? So without going too far afield, too far into that topic, I just want to make one more point, which is that, hang on one second. He talks about so remember last time in the last class, we talked about different synonyms for the 5 heaps, so we're think of us as, sentient beings, right? So we have bodies and minds. We talked about how we have form, right? So the body, and then all of the other aspects, of our mind. Those are like, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, mental consciousness. So that together is referred to in different ways, right? So we talked about 5 aggregates, transitory collection, and here are a few more: perishing aggregates, the 5 heaps, the 5 psychophysical aggregates, and here's another one, the appropriating aggregates. So all these translations for the same word in, Tibetan, it's really kind of crazy, but they get at the point that there's nothing enduring. Okay, so that's the most important part of this. All right. So because all of these aggregates, whatever you want to call them, pungpo, right? These 5 aggregates are collections of causes of suffering, right? So because of all of that, we definitely are going to experience misery. So Geshe Sopa says, these aggregates are appropriating. Why are they called appropriating aggregates? They're appropriating because they're attached to the things of the present, and they grasp after things of the future. I thought that was a really good quote, right? So that's why they're inextricably bound up with these negative tendencies or dysfunctional tendencies of karma and affliction, right? Okay. So that's who we are. All right, and then one last quote for those of you who are really interested in this. Oops, hang on one second. This is from the Lamrim Chimo by Tsongkhapa. He says defines very clearly the view. So we remember last time we talked about ignorance, the definition of ignorance, and we were talking about, how the I, me, myself, and I. So here it is in straight from the source. The reifying, so ignorance is well, this is one of, actually, I shouldn't say that. This is one aspect of the 10 negative afflictions. Okay, so anyway, the reifying view of this was wrong view. Okay. The reifying view of the perishing aggregates is an afflictive intelligence or an afflictive mind or awareness that observes the appropriated aggregates and regards them as I or mine. That is as the self, or that which belongs to the self, right? I or mine. Okay, here's the big point here. Hence, since perishing means impermanent and aggregates is plural, the terms indicate that what are apprehended are simply impermanent and multiple phenomena. Here's the punchline. There is no permanent and unitary person. That is why it's called the view of the perishing aggregates. Okay, so I hope that's helpful. So then in terms of bringing this back to karma, I talked about this actually a little bit already, but karmic latencies, or those karmic imprints or seeds, can lie dormant for many, 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 many lifetimes, right? So once, we've created an action, let's say, we're very generous, we helped start a new school for people who are vision impaired or deaf or something, or, you know, even just helping somebody complete an ordinary job, you know, going out of your way to try to help them finish up a project or something. All of that is good if it's done with the pure motivation, right? So that would leave positive imprints on your mental continuum, right? And as I said earlier, those seeds would only be activated when the conditions arise. So seen from the negative perspective, then, if you had to choose between, if you had to compare like karmic imprints, karmic seeds versus the negative afflictions, you know, which is more dangerous, then actually the afflictions are considered to be more dangerous, right? The negative emotions are more dangerous because if they never arise, if they were completely washed away and vanished from your mind stream, then those seeds will never bear fruit. So it's like, you know, if you have some very, very dry kindling, the kindling will never turn into a fire if the spark is never never comes into contact with it, right? So those are just things to be aware of, right? And all of this comes together when we address the topic of death. So before we do that, why don't we stop? Do you have any questions? If you want to unmute yourself, raise your hand. Let's pause for a few minutes before we change topics.
Yeah, I'll ask a quick question. The obvious question, which we've all heard a million times before, is that if the Buddha said, "Don't take my word for it, you must test this out for yourself, otherwise the Dharma or the practice will become weak." How can we test this out for yourself if, as you said, the time period for karma is unknown, for karma to ripen? It could be many, many, many lifetimes. So it's very difficult for us to
Yeah.
experiment with this or observe it or trust it ourselves. In fact, it's so impossible that we have to take somebody's word for it, which seems to be not what the Dharma or not what the Buddha told us to do. But more importantly, as North Americans, it's not really our nature to take somebody else's word for it. It's our nature to get the science and really investigate this and prove it, which I think
Sure.
is my biggest handicap here. And in fact, I'd say this is my biggest obstacle to the Buddhist practice. And I wish I could handle this obstacle, learn how to manage this obstacle for myself.
Oh, specifically with respect to the teachings on karma and whether or not
Karma is the biggest obstacle to my understanding and
yeah.
believing and embracing and really, you know,
No, you're right. You're right. It is
doing it.
Definitely only the Buddhas can understand in specifically the causes for past rebirths for a specific individual. Yeah, so that's considered a very hidden phenomena. And I think, you know, in my own practice, in my own system of way of thinking, I think I just start, you know, with very simple examples and try to take it from there, you know, and then try to think of the different relationships between cause and effect. I mean, I think what it comes down to is the relationship with ethics and cultivating virtue and realizing that, you know, maybe even from the a long point of view, you know, just doing, I mean, this is gonna really sound stupid, but, you know, just wanting to do the right thing, wanting to not harm others, wanting to always be there for somebody else, you know, just trying to act in a way that is in accord with almost like common sense, but being good natured, having an open heart, then all of that, you know, you can just tell from a basic I think being a good person kind of thing, you know that in the long run, that's got to get you somewhere. There's nothing bad that's going to come out of, having that kind of an approach to life. And, in the long run, if karma, if it turned out to be untrue, at least, you were doing your best to make the world a better place. That's all I can say.
Great answer. Thank you very much.
I don't know. Just do our best. But the pramana teachings are fascinating, and this is something that I'm not well versed in. But I just started. Khenpo Rinpoche was here in August last year, and he started talking about the Pramanavartika teachings, and it's really, really interesting, right, to see how these scholars, in all of the ancient Buddhist teachers have gone through with great precision, questioning who is the Buddha, why is he a valid, scriptural authority? Let's dissect the Four Noble Truths, and question every aspect of them and prove that they're not invalid, So that's like a whole nother beautiful, very, very rich aspect of the teachings. So the karma must be in there somewhere, and I probably just didn't get to it yet. That's a Geshe Dorje question. Anything else?
I have a quick question.
Please.
Did I miss the third suffering? You said there were 3 types of suffering.
Oh, okay. So we had the suffering of change, right?
Right.
Suffering of suffering, which is, kind of like ordinary, painful, obvious suffering. And then the third is this pervasive suffering.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. The neutral feeling. It's the big wound. It's like having a big, big wound. Or I think it's like being the big wound. Anything else? Okay. So we're going to move on. So, death. So first of all, what continues at death? So it's the most subtle mental continuum that carries along with it, these karmic imprints that we've been talking about, that then takes rebirth after this current life ends. Then that consciousness, then passes on to the intermediate state, the Bardo state. And then after a period of time, then the consciousness, then is reborn into one of the realms. Okay, so based on karma, primarily based on karma, I guess. Yeah, and you have to we take rebirth. So that being said, the meditation. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama said that the meditation on death, why are we meditating on death? It sounds quite depressing, right? But the meditation on death is not to provoke an emotional, panicky fear of death, which is of no benefit at all, but a wise awareness of our mortality that leads us to set good priorities in life, abandon harmful actions, and live ethically and kindly. Right? So I guess practice makes perfect, right? So the more we think about death, so that we can stare it in the eye without flinching, right? The more we think about it, then that allows us, to prepare for it, right? So it's not a question of just looking at death in the eye, right? We're talking about many, many, many ways of thinking about death, and ensuring that we're in the best possible position to determine our next life, right? That's what we've been talking about. The whole point is that we can, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, right? We can put an end to samsara by purifying negative karma, by intentionally creating merit, by being kind to other people and animals and etc. Right? And so if we prepare for death, then there's really no problem, right? This is not a big deal. It's just a passage. So hang on one second, because I had one other really nice. Oh, here, hang on, more quotes. So realizing that our lives are impermanent and ever-changing, the Extensive Sport Sutra says, this is very beautiful, the three worlds are as impermanent as an autumn cloud. The birth and death of sentient beings is like a dance. The lifetime of beings passes like lightning in the sky. It goes as quickly as water rushing down a steep mountain. Okay. So in terms of preparing for death, then the best thing, the most important thing, as you can imagine, based on your own experience, is to renounce attachment, right? So we can see that, even when we're not thinking about death, we realize that it's these sticky attachments that trip us up, right? Certainly, when it comes to contemplating death, then being able to recognize the impermanence of our relationships with loved ones, our relationships with our possessions, becomes, even more important, because it's that craving and grasping, particularly at the time of death, at the moment of death, if we still have residual craving and grasping, then that's going to make things more difficult, right? And so, not to bring up painful memories for anyone, but I will admit that when my father was very ill, and when he, I think, knew that, his time was coming, and then we had many conversations, where he would say, oh, would you like, my collection of records? Would you like my collection of CDs? I have an extensive collection of books. Look at all these books, he would say, would you like to take these books? And so I have to admit that, when you're ever in that position, then of course what I should have said was, yes, don't worry about it. I will take everything, in the apartment, everything in the home, and I'll take good care of it. You don't have to worry. That's what I should have said. And you can see, when somebody's about to die, right? They start not just giving things away, but they start losing interest in things that ordinarily, would have been fascinating for them, things that would have been a great source of pleasure. Then as the person starts to withdraw and starts to move on, then those sources of pleasure start to lose their attraction, and maybe the New York Times is no longer very interesting, maybe listening to music is no longer interesting, looking at family photos, no. So being sensitive to those changes, perhaps witnessing those changes in yourself, that's all part of a gradual renouncing of attachment. And so to prepare for, our own death, then, we can examine our relationship with our things, and just even practice giving things away, even mentally, right? Okay, I've got this beautiful house. I'm giving it away for the benefit of all sentient beings. Maybe someday may all sentient beings have, a safe place to live in. Wow, wouldn't that be wonderful? Okay, well, let's start with, you can have my house, right? Even just generating that intention, even better if you could actually do it. But even just generating the intention is kind of primes the pump, so to speak, for being able to renounce attachment. And then also, in preparing for death, all the idea of dying with bodhicitta, right? And so thinking that, may my death then give rise to the opportunity, to the ability for me to be able to carry on in my next life, my aspiration to becoming a bodhisattva for the benefit of all sentient beings. May my experience of any pain or sickness or suffering associated with this, illness that I have, may I use that as the causes and conditions to take on the suffering of other sentient beings who are similarly experiencing whatever it is, cancer, kidney failure, COVID, and the like, right? So those are just, some of the ideas. And then there's actually a very beautiful 9-point meditation on death, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. And so I was thinking that maybe I would go through at least some of it with you. So it's the 9, again, the different translations of the name of this meditation, but I have a version that was prepared, a version of a meditation that was prepared by the Venerable Joan Halifax Roshi. So she's, I think, the founder of the Upaya Zen Center and has many years of experience in like hospice and death and dying, and is very, very well respected in this field. So the 9 points are the 9 contemplations are the same as the teachings in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. There's no difference. So maybe we'll spend the next few minutes going through this. So just, I'll do this kind of as a guided meditation. Are there any questions before we start this? Anything that's unclear? All right. So just sit comfortably. Let your mind settle. And relax. So the first point is that all of us will die sooner or later. So that even though it's difficult to accept this, then that's the reality. There's no way around it. The minute we're born, we're actually in the process of moving towards death. And so we are very much migratory beings. In Tibetan, the word is droa. Droa means to go, all right? So we're goers, we're transmigrators. We're always moving towards somewhere, towards death. Okay, and not a single sentient being, no matter how powerful they are, how spiritually realized they are, has escaped death. So all the gifts of our lives, everything that we've accumulated so carefully over the years, our education, our wealth, our status, our beautiful bodies, our good health, friends and family, all of this will make no difference at the moment of death. And in fact, they can make it more difficult because we tend to worry about them. We tend to hold on to them. So take this opportunity to just remind yourself that death is inevitable. And not only will we die, but everyone who's close to us, everyone who we love, they too will have to pass away. So our lifespans, our lives are decreasing continuously. So if we're born with a certain number of breaths, a certain number of years to live, then we're moving towards that end state, breath by breath. And so ask yourself, what are you doing now? How are we living our lives to the fullest to support and create the conditions for a gentle death, for a smooth transition? What will give your life meaning and the lives of others meaning, given the brevity of our lives? Death will come whether we're prepared or not. So how much time have we spent in actually preparing for death? How much time have we spent in purifying negative actions and creating the causes for a happy rebirth? How many of our thoughts are we even aware of? How many of these thoughts are about liberation from suffering and death? What have we done with our lives? So we can watch our minds. How have they reacted so far in this contemplation on death? Do you find this difficult? Is your mind fidgety? Or is it accepting? Our lifespans, like that of all living beings, is not fixed. Think of the many beings who died this day. How many of them thought that they were going to die today? Even people who are extremely, extremely old and extremely, extremely ill. Like my uncle who just passed away a few days ago. He was 97 years old, bless his heart, and had kidney failure and heart failure. Even so, on the day that he died, when he woke up that morning, he didn't know that he was going to pass away that day. My cousin thought that she was going to take him home from the hospital that day. Can we live each day as if it were our last? Can we listen to one another, relate to one another as if there's no tomorrow? How does that perspective change our relationships with others? to things that might seem so important, maybe a little argument, an altercation over something little. Would that still happen if you knew that you were going to die at the end of the day? So death has many causes, right? There's so many different ways in which we can pass away. And our bodies are very fragile and vulnerable. We're compared to bubbles on the surface of a river that's flowing by. Those little water bubbles, so fragile, easily popped, right? And then nothing can prevent us, nothing can help us at the time of death, right? Our friends and family are not a source of refuge. And certainly our material wealth is of no benefit. You may have a beautiful house, a nice car, jewelry, even really good medical care, right? When your time is up, your time is up, and none of that can help. And so, you know, there's no point in spending a lot of time and energy and effort accumulating things that are not going to help you at the most critical moment of life, which is death. So as Buddhists, you know, actually we're devoting all of our lives for that one moment. It's all a preparation for death. That's the priority, okay? All right. So your very own body, right? We were talking about the perishing aggregates, right? The appropriating aggregates. So our very own body cannot help us at the time of death, right? So the body is kind of like, it's like an Airbnb, right? It's just a temporary place where we dwell, where we abide. It's like a rental car, right? And at the time of death, then we cast aside our beautiful bodies that we've worked so hard to take care of. We made them, you know, look good. We dressed them up, put on body lotion, all different kinds of creams, and et cetera, right? At the time of death, you know, we have to leave our bodies. Just as like you leave the Airbnb. So ask yourself, you know, what's really important for you in light of this realization that we can't hold on to the body when we die. What can we do to prepare? What can we do to strengthen our awareness and our capacity to accept and to surrender to death, you know, gracefully, with dignity, and easily, with a sense of ease, passing on. A sense of confidence. I think it's confidence, it's a sense of faith. You know, passing away when you don't have a spiritual tradition when you don't have a place of refuge, a firm sense of refuge, is very, very frightening. And so I think it's very, very, based on what I've witnessed, I'm sure many of you have been in a similar situation, then I think, you know, it's very, very clear that contemplating death and really doing all we can to prepare for it is extremely, extremely important. And it's really, you know, the main purpose of our lives. So the next topic is talking more like about solutions, right? Solutions in terms of how to cope with change, impermanence, and change. What are some of the things that we can do? How can we change? So before I switch gears, are there any questions about death? Or anything you'd like to share? All right. So, given what's going on in the world today, everybody's being forced to change, forced to look at the world, look at ourselves, in a new way, right? For those of us that, are not like in a monastery, in a nunnery, in like a situation where they're almost in permanent quarantine, where they're very safe, they don't have to wear masks or anything, they're perfectly free to walk about and move around, right? Because they're always, kind of in a state of quarantine anyway. For them, there's been very little effect. But for the rest of us, but this is actually, going back to this idea of a silver lining, making the best of the situation, right? So there are many of us who are doing, who are searching, doing some soul searching here. We're looking for answers within. We're looking for faith. Faith in our spiritual path. We're finding a new spiritual path. Because we're challenged by the external situation. And when that happens, then self-reflection, right? Meditation, self-reflection becomes even more relevant. So Dzigar Kuntrul, in his book, It's Up to You, The Practice of Self-Reflection on the Buddhist Path, he talks about how we relate to change. And he says, the possibility of change exposes our love affair with ourselves. And no matter how painful that relationship has been, we may suddenly question our ability to change. Most of us like ourselves very much. We're somewhat addicted to being who we think we are. Maybe we could just keep it that way. The idea of change feels like being unfaithful to ourselves. So we resist change and become illogically stubborn about holding on to habitual patterns. So we're not going to change unless, we're absolutely in unbearable agony, right? Mental or physical agony. Where we're going to try to prevent ourselves from having to change. That's just, like it's, so as we're saying, it's kind of like human nature, right? But as we've learned, if we take an honest look at the state of samsara, the state that we're in now, the fact that we are just collections of suffering, all of that should be, a profound source of inspiration and motivation to change, right? We wouldn't be here in Buddhist and studying the Dharma if we didn't want to change. Okay, so remember that we can choose to end our suffering at any time by eliminating the three poisons. The three poisons being, everybody shout them out, ignorance, attachment, and hatred, right? So we can do that. We can choose to do that. That's the truth of cessation, right? And we're going to talk about how we can do that. So there's, okay, another quote here. Quote, page 247, volume 2. Hang on 1 second. 246. Where's my bookmark? Ordinarily, you allow pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feelings to become causes of the three poisons: attachment, hostility, and ignorance. This is the powerful engine that drives you through endless cyclic existence. By applying these instructions, though, you transform the way you view these three types of feelings so that instead of giving rise to the poisons, they lead to disenchantment with samsara, so like renunciation, patience, and the wisdom that realizes the true nature of things. This is the way to gain liberation from cyclic existence. So that's it in a nutshell. That's what we have to be able to do to be able to get the heck out of here. So we can accomplish this the same way that all the Buddhas have, by practicing the Eightfold Noble Path, watching our thoughts and being mindful of how our conduct affects others. We have to be consistently vigilant so that we can catch even the slightest malevolent thought before it manifests as an insult, a crude joke. Since our thoughts and feelings are in constant motion, there's always traffic to monitor. We can intentionally nurture and support our positive thoughts by dwelling on them with focused attention and rejoicing in our virtue. A simple example: let's say somebody asks me for help, like going shopping for them. So instead of mumbling and coming up with excuses like I probably would, if a sincere wish to benefit them arises, then that's something to rejoice in and feel good about. Likewise, we can make a point of being open to receiving the kindness and generosity of others without second guessing their intentions or thinking that we're somehow undeserving. If you're an Uber driver and a passenger gives you a 5-star rating and a humongous tip, don't think you don't deserve it. Watching the mind on a moment-by-moment basis requires a balanced approach. If we're too tight, then we run the risk of being anxious and exhausted, and we give up. So, so it's like, following the strict COVID protocols, right? We're tired of wearing masks. We're tired of social distancing and hand washing. We just want a break, right? But the moment we relax, the virus attacks. On the other hand, if we don't make an effort to watch what's going on upstairs, if we're too laid back, too loose about it, then we lose control. So it's like, if you go on a walk in the woods with your dog and you let the dog off leash, then the dog seems to be fine. It's running around, romping free in the woods until it's distracted by another dog. And you call it, right? You're calling your attention back. It's off there, worrying about the past or fantasizing about the future. You try to call it back, but maybe, it doesn't come back immediately. So your dog is off in the woods. It sees another dog. You call it, you say, hey, Rover, come back, right? But it doesn't always come back, and you can end up, in a dog fight, right? Try to call it, doesn't come back, gets in a fight. So we have to find that balance. So how can we do that? We don't want our mind to be so anxious. You're trying to watch your mind. Oh, look at the thought, look at that thought, look at that feeling. Oh my God, right? Before you know it, you can just burn out. You don't want to do that. On this other hand, you don't want to not make an effort and just, space out and forget about the whole shebang. So one approach is to check in with the mind at scheduled intervals throughout the day, right? So in the morning, when you wake up, you can go back for just a few minutes. Just try to think about what transpired, during the night, right? You think about your dreams. Was there anything interesting? Think about, so then at noon, you could just break the day up into as many intervals as you find comfortable. Maybe at noon, before you have your lunch, do the same thing. You think, okay, between when I woke up and now, how are things going? What's been going on upstairs? What kind of thoughts have I been having? What's my motivation been? Have I been, in a happy, open-hearted state of mind, or am I my usual crabby, grumpy, me, myself, I state of mind? What could I do about that? How can I change that? How can I turn that around? etc. Right? What do I have to rejoice in? What do I have to regret? What can I purify? And then finally, let's dedicate all of the positive virtue that I've created so far. Another idea that I was thinking about is that, again, going to this idea that we are transmigratory beings, right? That we're going somewhere, that we're migratory beings, this idea of impermanence. So life is always in transition, right? So it's like, we're in a waiting room. You're in a waiting room, you're waiting to see the doctor. You're just sitting there waiting. It's that experience of, something's going to happen, but I'm just waiting right now. Or you're in an elevator. You're going up in an elevator, you're going somewhere, but you're again in transition. Or my favorite example is you're in the airport, like in that customs area, that kind of weird customs area where you got off the plane, you're half asleep, you have to go through customs, and there's like this line, and you're going to see the customs officer. Although I think now a lot of it's automated, but anyway, right? It's kind of this weird intermediate state. It's kind of like the bardo, I think, right? Or, then also when you think of how we move through our lives, like we go through school, we go from kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade, and then maybe through college, et cetera, or moving up the career ladder, there's always a sense of, like we're going somewhere, right? And so we need to remember that, yeah, we're going somewhere, but where are we going, right? We're moving to death. We're moving, always relentlessly moving step by step, closer and closer to death. So that's the final destination for this life. And as we've been saying, we can use this life as to prepare for our next life. So all of the Buddha's teachings, all 84,000 teachings, we should think of as personal instructions, for our daily lives. Right? You don't really need to have, it's wonderful to have a guru, to have that very, very close relationship. Of course. But in the meantime, if we find ourselves in a position where we don't have that close relationship, well, that's okay, because look, it's all in the books, right? So don't think that you have to wait for some special personal one-on-one, meeting with a lama. The books are here. The Buddha's teachings are here, right? And they're very, very clear on what we need to do to prepare for our next life, right? So there's this beautiful analogy of the Buddha being the physician who can cure each and every one of our illnesses. The Dharma is the medicine that we need to take, and the Sangha is like the nurses who help us get the medicine. And so the analogy is that, even though the Dharma is there, we have access, we've received the best possible medicine to cure our illnesses. If we just, take the medicine home and put it in our closet, in the medicine cabinet in the bathroom, and never actually, follow through and take the medicine, then it's useless, right? Then it's an opportunity, a very precious opportunity that we've wasted. Okay. So it's like, also particularly in the case of antibiotics, right? You have to take all 10 days worth of antibiotics. And if you don't, if you give up after day 5 because it makes you nauseous, then you're actually putting yourself in a much more dangerous situation. So, likewise, I would think that if you only started learning the Dharma, you started learning some of the teachings, and then maybe, you became too busy and then you didn't follow through and learn the rest, then, you may end up developing like wrong views, right? So be very careful about that. All right. So more specific ideas about dealing with change. I found a really good article in the New York Times. It was published on September 7th in the Smarter Living section, which is the only section I read. how to cope when everything keeps changing. And I pulled out just a couple of ideas. I know we're running out of time, but there was the article quotes a leadership expert named Margie Worrell, who wrote a book called You've Got This, The Life-Changing Power of Trusting Yourself. And she wrote, right now, people are dealing with immense uncertainty, but the truth is we've never really had certainty. We just thought we did. This was an illusion. Like the whole article sounds very Buddhist. So when something changes, she talks about how, we resist change because we're wired to crave comfort and certainty, right? We want stability. And how can we override that rejection, that impulse? It's by trusting in our innate capacity to handle change and adapt to new situations. So we have within us the ability to be able to adjust to whatever life throws up. And the crucial to that is this idea of not getting stuck in the past, right? So instead of looking back and thinking, oh, I should have done this or had this, this should have, if the COVID situation wasn't here, well, then, I wouldn't be going to college, taking, classes online. I would be able to be with my friends, blah, 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 right? There's no point in getting wrapped up regretting what could have been. Instead, what we need to do is to look at what's going on around us from a broader perspective. and also accept the fact that, even though we think that our carefully laid out plans, would have materialized, that kind of thinking, is erroneous, right? Because, we all know just from going around the block a few times that we can have the most carefully laid out plans and something can come along and mess it up, right? So we don't have full control over our lives in terms of, having everything fall into place the way we want to. But what we do have control is our reaction to the situation when things don't fall into place, right? That's what we can control. So a big part of stretching, what she calls, is mental flexibility, right? We'll have to develop flexibility, resilience, the ability to rapidly change to a situation that is rapidly changing, right? So it comes down to accepting what we thought we knew was actually unknowable to begin with. So other things that we can do is to look back, like think, okay, well, 10 years from now, how do I want to think about my time during this? How did I react? Did I react, with strength and resilience and being able to adapt? Is that the way we want to think of ourselves? What can I learn about myself as a result of these circumstances? How can I rise to the occasion? What am I learning about my reactions? And then one last point that I thought was interesting was the idea of when we feel, out of control, when we feel like, we're panicking, we're having panic attacks, maybe because everything's just changing and we can't react fast enough, we feel that we're losing our grip, then the article suggests that we make very small incremental changes, even really easy, obvious changes to our routine, just to show to ourselves, to prove to ourselves, that yes, indeed, we do have agency, that we do have control over control over our lives, that we can make, choices. And then by continuing to make those decisions, to prove to ourselves that we have control, then we can make bigger and bigger decisions and regain our sense of self-confidence and really self-compassion, although the article doesn't mention that, right? So don't wait. The point is that don't wait for the future to be crystal clear, right? Because that's, I think, given all that's going on now, all the turmoil, that's a tendency is to just say like, wait, whoa, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to completely, put my life on hold because things are changing too fast. But instead, to make small incremental changes so that we don't feel like we're just being, tsunamied. Okay. Any questions, feedback? Anything you'd like to share? Everybody has completely fallen asleep. I could tell because all I see are these little static photos that are not changing. So you're probably all just like snoring away back there, but that's okay.
We're awake.
Somebody's awake.
Yeah, we're awake.
Yeah, we're awake.
Greetings.
Okay.
We're all awake.
So if nobody has anything to share, since it is, we're 2 minutes over.
I've got something for you if you want something. You used a lot of cool words. I can't remember them, but they were like agility and other really useful, I think, words, especially when you're talking about that article. I think you said Margie Warhol. Is that who it was?
Uh-huh.
And I think some of those words I've heard before. In fact, some of them sounded like, words we've heard the Tibetan equivalents of. Could you just repeat some of those? Because I found those really inspiring, and maybe talk a little about those in terms of relating them to some of the very simple Dharma or the Lam Rim or something. Might be fun if you wanted to.
Oh, how we can be flexible and responsive to change and resilient. Those keywords, is that what you're referring
Yeah, and it
to?
reminded me of that word pliable, and I just can't remember the Tibetan word for that.
Oh, pliancy?
Pliancy,
That's in the relation to meditation. Right?
Yeah, and in Lam Rim, but also like agility is such a cool thought, and I think these words that you were using, so
Agile development, software
yeah.
development term, right?
They just sound so Buddhist, I think they're really inspiring words.
Well, I think what I could do is maybe in the chat, I'll write down the date of the article, because there's a lot more to it. It was a very long article, and I'm not doing justice to it. So hang on, let me just try to type it in. It's not, I don't have the link with me because I goofed. I wanted to give you guys the list of all my references, but anyway, the point is that it's on September 7th. In NY Times.
While you're typing that in, there's one thing that I find very useful when I'm faced with, how you get mental agility. And it actually comes from the Roman Stoics. It's called amor fati, which means learn to love your fate, regardless of what it is in that moment. Because either it is setting you up for something better, it is going to teach you something, or it is a consequence of something you've been ignoring or have been avoiding and now have the opportunity to face. And in my practice in life, I've had many ups and downs. This last COVID round was one of the really bad downers, but I've repeated that phrase over and over again just to make it through a day and keep moving and keeping people alive as best as I could. And it was probably one of the most useful things I've ever learned in my life. So I'd pass that on for anybody who thinks agility is a good word. It's a cool word, but getting there is a whole different story, and that's how I found my way.
And your name is? Oh, this is
This is-
Joseph. Hey, hi. How are you?
Good.
Wow. Okay, would you mind repeating that?
Sure. we're talking about agility, but the question, which is a really nice thing, but the question is, how do you get there? And for me, one of the things I've learned was from reading Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics was the term amor fati, which means love your fate.
Love your faith.
Yeah, F-A-T-E, fate.
Fate. Okay, fate.
Love your fate, F-A-T-E. And because it is either going to be a precursor to a new opportunity, it is either going to teach you a lesson, or is an ability to own up to the consequences of prior behavior and change that behavior for the better.
Mm.
And so, I've had many ups and downs in my lives, far more than you would think, just to, given my station and stuff. But that has been a very, very useful thing for me to learn. And when I went through this, there were a couple of days in the last round of COVID that were as bad as any combat that I've ever been in terms of the number of casualties we had and the number of people that were dying that we could do nothing about and stuff. And I repeated that phrase over and over again.
Mm.
Really, it is a thing that brought me through that very, very trying time and stuff. And, we're starting to go through it again. I don't think it'll be as bad as it was the first time.
I hope not.
Yeah, but there's still going to be some really bad days in there, but I'm much better prepared because I've been through it already. And in my military training, obviously, there's some really bad days, obviously. Again, amor fati is what brought me through that as well. So if you're looking for agility, that one phrase for me, that mantra, really, really helps. And it's a very ugly, brutal mantra.
Mhm.
Understand, not pretty. It is not nice. It is a matter of facing up to things
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
accept that they are not anywhere near where you want them to be, or limiting. But you have to learn to love that fate and make the best of it.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think it seems closely related or parallel to this idea of karma, right? And that we're sowing the seeds of past actions, reaping the
That's
results.
precisely and that's precisely the point. When the other person said, that they want scientific proof for evidence of karma, for which there is never going to be any in our lifetimes, and things. To that person, I reach out and because it's a tough thing to think of, but you can use it personally to say, okay, how do I move from here? Given this has happened to me, how do I move forward from here?
Mhm.
And for me, it has been to accept that when bad things happen in my life, that I don't feel that I deserve at this point. I may be right or I may be wrong in that. I don't know. I mean, I'm a little bit up in the air about the karma thing, stuff. But if I accept that it is probably my karma from previous lives that I just don't know about, then fine. The question is, how do I change my behavior? What do I learn? How do I move forward from here?
Mhm.
And all those work. It's a kind of another version of the amor fati.
Mhm.
As far as I'm concerned, and I hope that person may find that useful to solving that very cryptic question of karma, which I fully understand the difficulty they have with that, and that's how I came to my resolution with it.
Beautiful. Thank you. Okay, so I have some closing verses. I don't want to hold you too much longer. Let me see if I can do this. I thought we could read this together. I think I had this done. Oh, you go over here, you go here. Okay, these are dedication verses. Aha. To abide in samsara for sentient beings. So we're over here. You can see, right? As long as any sentient being has not been liberated from samsara, may I abide in samsara to help them, even though I achieve highest enlightenment. May I become like a wish-granting jewel, fulfilling all the wishes, and like a wish-granting tree, fulfilling all the hopes of transmigratory beings. by merely seeing, hearing, thinking about, or remembering me, as well as by touching me or talking to me, may all suffering instantly be pacified, and may there be happiness forever. So thank you very much for coming. And in our last session next Thursday, we will be focusing on the mind of enlightenment, on bodhicitta, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about wisdom. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.